Hello and welcome to the 905er podcast. I'm Roland Tanner. Today is the second in our short series on the present and future of cycling in the 905 region, exploring where we are, what our region needs, and what's possible to build cities that encourage cycling and in the process become better, more attractive and healthier places for all. Our guest today is Dale Bracewell, founder of Mobility Foresight, a company providing advisory services to the public and private sector on building, quote, transformative and resilient solutions for mobility of people and goods. What that means in plain English is a company that helps those in positions to make change, often but not necessarily local government, to develop and implement pedestrian, cycling and transit master plans. Prior to founding Mobility Foresight, Dale acquired over 2 decades of experience developing a sustainable transportation system in Vancouver, creating the city's first active transportation team, and an integrated mobility plan for the Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games in 2010. Last week, Dale was the keynote speaker at the Ontario Bike Summit in Hamilton.
Before we begin our interview, we'd like to remind our listeners to please like, share, and subscribe to the 905er on whatever device you're listening to us on. As well, follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok to stay up to date with the latest episodes. And if you like what we're doing, please consider sponsoring us and donating a little bit of money to help us keep going. Visit us at 905er.ca and sign up at the supporter tab on the website. Thanks very much, everyone.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.
Welcome, Dale Bracewell, to the 905 podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Roland and Joel. Glad to be here.
So you were at the Ontario Bike Summit this week in Hamilton. You came all the way from BC to attend. Coming to Ontario, coming from the province of mountains to the only city in Ontario with a mountain, I guess, which is Hamilton, which is a very small mountain, but nevertheless, we take what we can. So you've been involved in the kind of bike infrastructure story out in BC for a very long time. What brought you to the Ontario Bike Summit, and what was your kind of impression of what needs to happen, or what the kind of themes that emerged this week?
Yeah, sure. First, to thank the Share the Road Cycling Coalition for the invitation. I had the pleasure of participating in the 2018 Bike Summit. At that time, I was at the City of Vancouver and had done years leading our active transportation team as the manager, and was sharing at that time 5 years ago, where we had advanced in terms of designing Vancouver for people of all ages and ability in terms of cycling. And so this time I was invited back to do a keynote because I've completed my career at the City of Vancouver and have now launched my own new venture called Mobility Foresight. And so the keynote was really kind of the journey over the 20-year career that I had at the city, much of which had been involved in either the planning or the designing for people cycling, and many transitions that we had done in Vancouver over those couple decades. And then as well, just to sort of, it's important to be looking ahead and to sort of see, especially for Ontario cities, but even across Canada nationally, how we need to keep moving forward in the progress that we've been making in enabling for people to cycle as one of the opportunities that they have to move around their city. So it was a combination, and including in that, I think a bit different also was, there's a little bit of a leadership and kind of a change management that you need to do sometimes to kind of make the progress. Cycling is still a pioneering mode in Canada, in terms of just like the proportion of trips. And so we've got more change to do. So hopefully brought a little bit of inspiration and some of the progress we'd made into Vancouver, and encouraging the audience to continue on, to keep doing what they're doing.
You know what? On that note, could you maybe just give us an insight? Like we on this podcast, we don't get a lot of chance to kind of venture outside the 905 and get kind of outside perspectives, but we welcome any chance we get. And I'm wondering, what kind of work did you do in Vancouver to encourage more cycling and more biking in one of Canada's great cities?
Okay, thanks, Joel, for the question. So, I mean, at the City of Vancouver, like, we had a profound change when we created our long-range transportation plan, which is called Transportation 2040. And so the big change was starting right at the policy level, where we made it our explicit goal to design to make cycling safe, convenient, fun, and comfortable, and for people of all ages and abilities. And cycling in Vancouver had been good up until then. We have a great seawall, and we had a very good network of what we called local streets, bikeways, and greenways, which are really the streets that you wouldn't see if you're driving around on arterials. And it was serving some part of Vancouver. But the big change then through our council approving that design goal for all ages and ability in 2012 meant we, as the engineers and planners, we had to design the cycling infrastructure differently so that it would truly be comfortable for, like, at that time, had three young kids to be able to bike around Vancouver. We were bringing on bike share in a couple of years, and we needed to be ready for new people who would want to be making, some short cycling trips. So that was kind of, and I can elaborate more, but that was kind of the distinct journey and difference. And I think we were, at least in Canada, one of the pioneering cities to really hold ourselves to that new infrastructure. And that meant, by the way, both upgrading existing infrastructure to that all ages and ability standard, but also, harder consultations in terms of new projects, new links to the network, that we really needed to engage residents and business and say it's a different type of look of how our public realm would be with the type of cycling infrastructure, usually protected, separated bike lanes or very calmed streets to be able to hit that new policy goal.
And what would you say has been the public's reaction to that? Once everything's said and done, are people having buyer's remorse now, or have people just kind of embraced the change and waiting for what's next?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like all answers to the who, there's probably a spectrum. But so I'm gonna roll it up though. We saw fantastic progress in both the number of people cycling as we created that infrastructure that was protected and welcoming for people all ages and abilities, and at the same time, because we held ourselves not just to collect data on the number of people, but the who. So, for example, at the keynote, I was sharing that when we had done one of our first protected bike lanes in downtown Vancouver, we measured the percentage of women, and it had been a painted bike lane on Hornby, and we converted it to a protected bike lane. Very controversial. So again, there were various opinions expressed on whether or not what the city was starting to do was good, but the net result was it was certainly meeting the policy goals. It was certainly giving more people the opportunity to choose a different mode, where I showed that the percentages went from like 29% in a couple of years up to 39%, while the thousands of people cycling a day on Hornby had also been increasing. So that's just kind of an example. But we were getting feedback around schools as well, for people who are now being able to kind of make journeys that they wanted to make to school, but with again more calm streets around some of the schools, it was enabling it, and people were giving us good feedback over the progress.
You said there was a fantastic progress in terms of sort of overall numbers, and it's great to hear, that kind of the range of people choosing to cycle also changing. I mean, that's obviously such an important factor. But you could put some bones on those numbers. I mean, what kind of increase were you looking at?
Sure, I could have pulled up my presentation, but what I was sharing, yeah. But so I guess, even before I had, started at the city, and the previous transportation plan, again, with those seawall and the local bikeways, there had already been, growth in people cycling. But once we started implementing designing for people all ages and abilities, cycling became the fastest growing mode in Vancouver. We actually doubled our percentage of people cycling daily from I think about 3.5% to 7%, and then journey to work, that kind of, you know, what we call the one that you can compare across all Canadian cities. We actually reached 10% of all work or school commute trips being by bike. So double digits. That's why I remember that one. And and then again, I can't remember what year, but we also had a really good system of measuring through a travel survey how many trips every Vancouverite did in a day. And and then we hit like the 100,000 bike trips in one day threshold. So just kind of some of the memories, and then projects themselves. Like when we did a significant greenway project, the Seaside Greenway, we saw an immediate doubling of the number of people cycling when we had kind of calmed an arterial down to, being a low volume street, much more calm and conducive to welcome people of all ages and ability to share the road and cycle.
So, I attended one of the sessions on Sunday. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to much more than that. But on Sunday with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, and it was very fascinating to sort of view what's been done in the Netherlands, obviously, and it's no surprise that they are far ahead, I guess, of Canada. However, one thing I did notice was I think a certain level of almost fatalism amongst some of the audience, of like, well, that's very nice, but it's never going to happen here, or it's not going to happen here for 100 years. I mean, like literally, I think someone said 5 generations or something like that. And it's like, well, that, I mean, I can see why there's that kind of danger of falling into that kind of pessimism and negativity when even a small, I've watched in our local municipalities here, fairly small bike lane projects turn into massive kind of all-encompassing, to use a word that isn't well known in Canada, a stramash, like just a sort of nightmare of the public revolting against this idea of losing space on their roads. How do you think, is that a trend that you've seen, and how do you think we can sort of counter that feeling of what's the point? Because all we're going to do is stir up a hornet's nest of anger amongst the public.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, Roland, and heard those questions of doubt. I think, though, to be fair, those are kind of pointing to, are we going to try and be like a Dutch city? And I don't think we should try, to be honest. I think what we need to do, at least that's what I was trying to do at the workshop, is glean, what can we learn from, our European counterparts, but we need to have solutions that work for Canadian cities. And so, for example, I'll take one of their 5 key takeaways that is applicable to us. We need to complete a network. So some of these challenges, we had them in Vancouver as well. When you're working on a significant road space, change to try and create that more delightful place for people cycling that's safe and comfortable, that can get quite controversial, and people do wonder, like, is it all worth it? I'd say for my counterparts in the cities, including those in Hamilton and those at the summit, the importance of completing a network is really important, because it doesn't have to be everywhere in this decade, but you're trying to allow that many more possible origins and destinations, again, thinking all the way from kids to seniors and new people cycling. And so that I'd say one of the key takeaways from the workshop is relevant for us here in Canada and Ontario. And so it's and then the other one, like feeding into transit. We have the opportunity to make cycling a better opportunity, but we're often really competing against the car. And I'm really excited. It wasn't mentioned often enough by our European colleagues, but I think for us, for example, the transformational opportunity of electric bikes is great. But I would echo what they were saying. We need to be thinking multimodal. When can someone bike to a higher order bus rapid transit? In your case, a GO train station. That's a small amount of cycling infrastructure that really unlocks the opportunity to not be burdened to have to take the car. Whereas I think part of what we were hearing, again, great presentation, but it's a whole culture shift that the Netherlands have done. And I don't think that's Canada. I think what we need to do is embrace the opportunities for us to, because there's lots of opportunities, and it's healthy, it's active, it's affordable. And again, not everybody has a car. And, transit, is hopefully going to keep getting better in our Canadian cities. But cycling with e-bikes and and bike sharing, massive opportunities that we need to embrace across our urban footprints.
I can certainly speak to that network thing, and I know. I mean, actually, we were talking earlier when we were talking to Eleanor about the at the moment in Burlington as a city that we're very familiar with, because Joel still lives there. I used to live there, and it's also Eleanor's hometown, and the feeling that there isn't that network doesn't exist. Now, I know there has been actually a lot of work done by local activist groups and by the city to try and start putting that network together, but of course it doesn't happen overnight. But how key that is to the feeling of viability of getting around the city by bike. And again, I recently moved to Hamilton, which is has much more of a I can get to an awful lot of places now on protected bike lanes, and it's actually my main means of transportation at the moment. And it is kind of transformative when it's like, okay, I'm not taking my life in my hands behind a white painted line. I know I'm actually going to be separated from the traffic, even if it is still the kind of barriers down the side road. That's a help at least. So it's that those details really are quite transformative in how in kind of viewing the as myself, like certainly not a someone who spent a lot of time cycling in the last couple of decades, but who's now looking and go, well, actually, that's the quickest way for me to get to where I want to go, and I don't have to pay for parking when I get there. So I have one of my long statements that doesn't end with a question mark, but I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, Roland, I just want for your listeners I just want to repeat what I heard, that you are personally experiencing a transformative way to move around. And it has been the difference of like the protected bike lane network in Hamilton that's enabled that. And that's exactly what we're talking about. That's why I'm saying, we don't need to become, a 37% of people cycling Hamilton or Burlington. But yes, we can get out of the single digits into double digits by creating and what you're experiencing. And what you said is really important. This is what I think we do need to pick up from the Dutch, that we're ultimately trying to make something that ends up being people's most convenient choice. And we do need to unlock that with safe, protected infrastructure that's, again, connected and part of a network that really serves you and, of course, all ages and ability well. So just kind of repeating back, because, and the thing is I guess, as we make those, and you make those types of decisions and others do, now you're freeing up road space for the people that still need to drive, that aren't yet served, because you can't do an entire network overnight or even over a couple of years. So they're served well if they still needed to drive, and then eventually a greater network or a more extensive out further from the urban core is serving them, and then they have that opportunity as well. And so that's why I'm a real believer in that this needs to be something that the Canadian cities like Vancouver to Hamilton and Burlington and Toronto, we all need to continue on this journey, because there's that many more opportunities for people to make that choice. And again, that helps everybody in the road network. The one other thing I would say that I encourage Canadian cities to do is, as you're, again, listening to experts from Europe, is we have a chance, like walking is so important for us, and we're an aging population. How do we, when we make these protected bike lanes, improve the walking environment? Firstly, we do that because then at least in Vancouver, we always had people cycling on the sidewalk. And it was only then after making, let's say, protected infrastructure along certain corridors and links that people stopped doing that. Well, that's a walking improvement as well. And often the protected bike lane can be a more, at least, delightful buffer than, let's say, parked cars for some in terms of their walking experience. And I think that's really important for us, so that we're really enabling both walking and cycling in our cities at the same time.
I wanted to kind of touch base on something that you hinted at in statement that you just said, and that was the idea of the culture change. And because I know there are people who are listening to this in their mind, they associate Vancouver and British Columbia with a very outdoorsy lifestyle already, a very active, healthier lifestyle. Stereotypes may be true or not, but I know some of our listeners are going to be like, well, it's an apples and oranges scenario here. But I'm wondering if you could tell us, like, have you seen a culture shift in Vancouver of people who are more readily accepting of bikes and cycling as maybe their primary mode of transportation around the city?
Yeah, and Joel, I think it's really important that you ask that, because it's very common that one of the stakeholders that push back is businesses, and so let's start there. Mm-hmm. It's really important that the municipalities, again, along with whoever else the partners are, whether they're cycling advocates or just others who want to create a cycling friendly city, work with businesses. And what that meant for us in Vancouver, which I would encourage others to do, is not just on the project itself, but create an ongoing forum for businesses to share what are their woes. It was only when we engaged businesses with the beginnings of our protected bike lane network, which rightfully so, they said kind of was new and kind of didn't come through a regular plan, and they were right. But by engaging them for a couple of years, they came up with some good solutions. For example, they wanted the impact of the construction phase to be more minimal. Can we make some businesses or open signage to support them? Yes. The other was, again, each city might be different, but in Vancouver, it was really important for them to say, we know that you're going to do more of these cycling projects. Can you please have a declared in advance 5-year map? Because we make business decisions, we make leases, and we kind of want to know ahead, even before you're willing and coming out to us to talk about the engagement of the changes. We said, yes, we can do that, because we aren't going to be building the cycling infrastructure everywhere in the city. We can come up with a full 5-year map. And I'm just giving you a couple examples. And then the result was, I'm not saying that maybe then businesses, the biggest enablers of an emerging bike culture, but they were a part of it, such that our downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, after years of working with them and having those types of conversations and solutions that supported their bottom line, the businesses that they support, they became supporters of kind of the ongoing cycling culture. One more was that also having the conversation with businesses where they start to realize, wow, lots of my employees are biking or actually want to, and that's important for them as well, because parking for employees all day as opposed to customers is also an impact for them. So that's, I would say, the journey of bike culture and businesses. I'd say one of the top 3 I would recommend that cities have.
And the reason why it's fascinating to hear, because that's one thing that a lot of our, I think, criticism I hear is just build it, but nobody ever really does think with talking to the small business or medium-sized businesses in the areas affected to say you need their buy-in. But I find it's fascinating because I think it's very applicable here to the 905. That being said, I'm going back to my original premise of people saying, well, you're in the West Coast and you have nothing to do with the 905. And I was thinking, as you're describing this change, geographically, Vancouver is very limited in terms of how much it can continue to build out. Like you're right on the mountain, the Rocky Mountains there. So it's not as if you can just say, okay, I'll just build that new farmland. I'm just going to build a new subdivision or a new strip mall on that plot of land. So you're very limited in terms of the space that you can use. And I find it mirrors here in the 905 because we've built a green belt around the 905 where, in theory, we're no longer allowed to build into. Politically, that might be different, but I'm not going to bore you with those details. Our listeners will know what I'm talking about. But again, we've legislatively said we're making this imaginary line. We'll no longer be able to build there. So it's kind of, we built our own mountain that we can't build into. And I just kind of want to talk about the necessity of that cycling infrastructure, that cycling project for the future growth of these two areas that, as we become a denser populated people, how viable is or how important is cycling to ensure that we're able to get around and be able to live with each other peacefully, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that, I guess, maybe don't know exactly where we have the direct equivalent, but if we both have geographic kind of boundaries and or constraints, ours a little maybe more pronounced by water and mountains. But yeah, I think, making complete communities and having more opportunities for the things that we want to do in our daily lives, they tend to be in closer proximity, enabling then especially walking. Like I said, that's why I say walking and biking, but cycling as well, because it's not about being someone who bikes for all of their trips every day or all week, but it is as we then build out these communities in the kind of larger Toronto, Hamilton area, and I'll call it the Metro Vancouver area, not just the City of Vancouver where I work. I live in North Vancouver. I had to bike over one of only two vehicular bridges that had at least some place for people cycling to be able to get to work every day. And so there's a water constraint that, have to take a bridge over and the equivalent. So as we do that, there's something that's kind of worth mentioning, and it's the idea of safety in numbers. Once we start seeing more people on, a growing protected bike lane network, it does a couple things. We start seeing ourselves kind of more, and our friends and our neighbors there kind of also making the occasional choice to bike. But then we're also sometimes drivers, and we're also picturing a loved one also riding a bike. And it actually is proven that once you start getting a little bit more people cycling, then it starts, fostering again the complete community, and people are like, yeah, that's their choice for today, that's my choice for tomorrow, and both driving or cycling. And so there's an opportunity over time to see that grow and really be a more vibrant society, and where people are healthier, and having more opportunity to make those. Again, it's all about convenience usually anyways, but it's comfortable and safe when they choose cycling. And those, so anyways, back to the point. Yeah, some of those boundaries are very helpful for helping build out kind of more sustainable communities that we all enjoy.
Mm-hmm. So in your line of work now, where I presume you're working with municipalities, trying to encourage them to sort of take the next step. And certainly, I mean, I found over the years that, I don't know about BC, but municipalities in Ontario can be small c conservative beasts, and that even minor incremental change can be unbelievably hard to get progress on. Not always because of the politicians, but because of kind of institutional inertia in different municipal departments, and not infighting, but conflicts of interest between departments, where this department may support cycling infrastructure, but this department's like, this is not a priority. Is that something you run into, that kind of sort of banging your head against a wall sort of process in municipal governments? And if you do, I mean, how do you think we overcome that?
Yeah, well, thanks, Roland. I guess it's a bit of an introduction, a little bit more to mobility foresight. Kind of what I'm trying to do is, there are cities across Canada that are running into those walls, and I'm just trying to make myself able to say, hey, had a long career at the city, an opportunity to kind of break through some of the barriers there, and how do I help you? It can be frustrating, and sometimes just a little bit of an engagement with someone else helps. And so the idea, though, is as you look ahead with foresight, to kind of bang through some of those barriers, you need to look ahead. And COVID was, of course, the massive disruption in mobility that's easy now to reference. But there are other outside influences that are also going to push us to want to have more cycling-friendly cities. So, for example, I mentioned electric bikes, but let's go further to that. Cargo, urban freight. There is a large trend across Canada, including, and I just put on LinkedIn this morning, City of Toronto doing a partnership with Purelator. Why? Because it makes sense, and they're converting truck deliveries to electric cargo bikes. And we had that pilot idea in Vancouver. Montreal's been doing it. And this is happening, everywhere. So to kind of, I guess, don't put your head in the sand and to be looking ahead. Not only there's all this planning and policy, I think, that we've kind of covered well in terms of why people cycling. What I'm trying to do to help other cities, and now I'm being engaged from Halifax, to municipality here in Metro Vancouver, and hopefully more across Canada, is, hey, let's look at these, because when you start seeing trends and becoming patterns, and you kind of start seeing there's more than 3 reasons to enable a cycling friendly city, and now there's 8. This is going to be good for your economy. This is going to be good for people. This is going to be good for your environment. Climate change, resilience. That's the other. I mean, we're going to have some uncertain times. The cycling infrastructure, and again, it was shared at the Bike Summit. I would say, hey, how are you doing with stormwater management? Maybe your next cycling infrastructure project is part of how you want to manage water, which is harder to predict, and we're getting, more different climate storms. And then, that's the breakthrough for them, right? And then someone else is like, Vision Zero, safety. Yes, we truly do want to eliminate all fatalities and serious injuries. Okay, well, now that's still going to point to the same type of cycling design that was emphasized at the Bike Summit. So I guess I have a lot of optimism. I've got a lot of ideas, and I would just try to, resonate and sort of see, municipality, city by city, urban center, what is actually, because each of them tends to have a bit of it, whether it's the politics or the administration, or what, again, the residents and business want in that community. But there's so many good reasons to build out a bike-friendly city. I just think if people are willing to have the conversation, we can find a way forward.
You're talking about you're working from literally coast to coast on this, and I'm wondering if you can give us kind of that perspective of what are Canadians' attitudes towards this more healthier lifestyle friendly urban planning across the country.
Yeah. Thanks, Joel. I'd say what I'm hearing, and again, it's still early days. It's my first year of the company, so I want to qualify it. But I think that it's really the idea around what part is your kind of, whether you're a city or a region, is your kind of true urban core, and then kind of maybe your next level is sort of like your mid to close suburbs, and then your suburbs, and really looking at that. Mentioned transformative. Look at the transformation starting with where it makes the most sense, where you got the density to make the kind of more complete community, and again, always thinking that when we're enabling for people cycling, it's actually helping all modes. I think safety is a common one that resonates. Everybody can agree on safer streets. And then again, depending on sort of kind of the urgency of whether it's, climate change or resilience, or the economy, then I would, go more to the businesses. But there's, I think, just an overall appetite for more sustainable mobility. And then the challenge, I'd say, is, of course, still with proper engagement on the kind of the right size and the right pace of type of solutions of transformation in each of those cities, because that's where I'd say the greatest variance is.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I thought you've mentioned a couple of times the impact of the kind of e-bike revolution. I don't know if revolution is too strong a word or too weak a word on the kind of cycling world. How big of a change is that? I know I heard the weekend that in the Netherlands, this is something they didn't see coming, and it's actually changed the way they're having to plan for the future of their infrastructure, and that it's simply not big enough anymore for the sort of volume of traffic they're getting. But is that do you think something the e-bike side of things is something that is really going to have a big impact here?
Yes, and I think the one I tend to point to is Denver. They have kind of like the best example where they actually had an e-bike incentive program, and it's not just the story that the e-bike incentives went within one day, because maybe people were ready for that. But they, again, sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but they published fantastic results of how those e-bikes replaced car trips and how those then saved tonnage in terms of greenhouse gases that weren't taken up, which again created a healthier Denver for everybody by certain people just taking the first wave of e-bike incentives. So what it's doing is, like, you have your mountain, your escarpment. We have our True Mountain in Vancouver. Other Canadian cities that we're not talking about have a lot of winter. And the idea of e-bikes, I absolutely think it's a revolution. And I would encourage cities to think of something like e-bike incentives, at least in this opportunity to have a faster transformation. And then again, that complemented with continuing to complete your network. And again, like I said, bringing in the safety, but also the safety in numbers with more people. So I think e-bikes unlock so much. People who don't want to sweat and they just want to show up in good work clothes. Fantastic. E-bikes cover that. The other thing about e-bikes is, in my own personal use, I realized you can use it when you want, and then you can kind of relax and pedal slowly if you like. And it's choice. It's just then unlocking a greater chance of your choice in mobility. And I think it's still untapped, and I think we've got more to kind of tap into here in Canada. Again, Denver being a great example of the transformation they have with just one wave of incentives for more people to be able to choose cycling.
And I guess I was hearing someone the other week talking about this, about, I think it's sort of like the mountain bike community is like people turn up with an e-bike and people can be a bit sniffy. Well, it's the lazy people turning up on their e-bikes. And it's like, well, no, this is still active transportation, because you can still pedal them and you're still getting out of the house, and you're still being more active than you would have been in the car. It's just a different, it's just a slightly less intensive mode, I guess, of not that cycling has to be intensive, but I've never been on an e-bike, but is that a kind of fair reflection of what the newest generation of e-bikes are kind of doing?
Yeah, and I'd say also there's a variety of e-bikes. So for example, Tampa Bay, imagine we'll see that they're going to be successful in terms of the results, but they created vouchers for different types of e-bikes. So again, mostly how people would picture these is European, but, cargo bikes where, a parent could have one of their young children, in the cargo bike, again, reducing a car trip around the school, where we definitely, want to have, less cars for everybody who's arriving. So yeah, there's different types of e-bikes, and again, some are being much more, chic and kind of trendy, and others are more utilitarian. But it's like auto manufacturers. There's just a wider range now, availability and different types for, again, even multiple parts of the family being able to make a journey together.
We should probably draw this to a close here, but I mean, I was just wondering, as a final thoughts to think. I mean, I don't know how well you know Hamilton, but obviously you were here this week. If you had the ability to sort of wave a magic wand and make one change to Hamilton's cycling infrastructure right now, is there something that you would immediately try to do, whether it's like a single intersection or as a kind of overarching theme that you'd recommend a city like Hamilton try to implement?
Well, let me just, I'll say street trees. I saw for the protected bike lane network that I saw, and I heard really good advancement of kind of more cycling network plans coming. But I think, again, thinking of how to make the street more delightful for people walking and cycling, and street trees even in between, let's say, a protected bike lane and the moving car lanes, again, creates a buffer for both people walking and cycling, and again, has stormwater management, green infrastructure, resilience, et cetera. So that would be my main encouragement, is continue your trend, but have those streets more delightful with urban trees in Hamilton, as one observation.
I'll certainly vote for more delightful streets and a more delightful Main and King in particular. It couldn't be less delightful than they are right now. Dale, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and all the best with your future endeavors, and we may speak to you again in the future.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Roland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.